Why the US will always be Russia's enemy. Howdy, folks. Tuning into AmChron. Today, we're diving into a hot topic: why the US and Russia will always be at odds. Recently, Andrei Stopp, the program director at the Vandai Club, penned an article explaining why the relationship between Moscow and Washington is stuck in a perpetual state of hostility. According to him, America's desire to dominate and its refusal to treat other nations as equals are the main reasons this relationship is as sour as spoiled milk. Andrei Stopp says America's arrogant attitude makes it hard for the US to build relationships with countries like China, India, and even close allies like Turkey and Saudi Arabia. Russia and China, on the other hand, believe in peace through compromise among the big powers. But the US thinks peace is a given and doesn't need special effort to maintain. They believe that more weapons mean more peace, which is just plain nuts. Stopp argues that the West doesn't want a peaceful world. They want to control everything. Changing the US administration won't change this dynamic. Russia should stand on its own and not rely on American elites because, in the end, Washington will always be hostile towards Russia. Sometimes, it even benefits the US to pick a fight with Russia. The US and Russia are as different as night and day when it comes to ideology. Even as we approach the mid-21st century, American experts still think Russia is part of the West and will eventually come around. But China is their real adversary. The Americans believe that eventually Russia will have no choice but to accept whatever Washington offers. The dollar will continue to dominate in the medium term, and global stability will depend on America's political drama. When it comes to Ukraine, the US sees a cheap way to weaken Russia and stop Europe from seeking strategic independence from America. Over the past 2 years, Washington has found this approach quite affordable. The Russia-EU relationship is broken. Gas pipelines from Russia to Western Europe are destroyed. Eastern Europe is militarized, and the American military-industrial complex is booming while Western Europe's economy suffers. America's goal in the Ukraine crisis is to weaken Russia. They want Russia to lose control over crucial advantages in Eurasia, like transportation, economy, manufacturing, and energy. The US wants to kick Russia out of the top 5 global powers. However, the US is realizing that using Ukraine as a deterrent against Moscow isn't as cheap as it seemed. Ukraine's military, material, and human resources are nearly depleted, and keeping Ukraine afloat is increasingly costly for both the US and the EU. America has viewed Russia as a weakening strategic force, waiting for it to drop out of the top 5 powers so they can focus fully on China. The US abandoned negotiations with Moscow at the end of 2021, pushed Ukraine towards a military solution, and then forbade it from negotiating with Russia because they believed they could quickly defeat Russia. They rallied 52 nations around Ukraine with economic, military, intelligence, satellite, and other support to take down Russia. But the West underestimated Russia's potential and their own alliance's capabilities, so their short-term goals failed. The stalemate between Russia and America should be seen as a long-term confrontation. It will persist even when Washington realizes that Ukraine has lost its significance as a tool. The US will just shift its anti-Russian focus to another country, willing to sacrifice itself in the fight against Moscow. America will remain a strategic rival, and Russia will need to stay vigilant for decades to come. The conflicts between Russia and the US are ghosts of the past, remnants of the Cold War between the Soviet Union and the US, between socialism and capitalism. The Soviet Union and the US allied against fascism in World War II, but their conflicts never disappeared. After the war, these countries moved from allies to adversaries, with the Soviet Union as the bastion of socialism and America leading the free world against communism. The US launched the Cold War to contain the Soviet Union and socialist countries, forming military blocs and bases worldwide to isolate the Soviet Union. After 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed, but Russia remains a symbol of the powerful Soviet era, taking over its role at the United Nations. The Warsaw Pact dissolved, but NATO not only survived but expanded eastward, threatening Russia's security. Russia can't just sit back and watch the West do whatever it wants. The current Ukraine crisis mirrors the East-West standoff of the Cold War. Under Putin, Russia is a leading power, asserting itself as a counterbalance to the West. the resurgence of a formidable Russia is something the US and EU don't want. While the US tries to maintain a unipolar world order, Russia pushes for a multipolar world where it has a significant role. Many US and Western decisions face Russian opposition and veto at the UN Security Council. Thus, we conclude that only the collapse of either Russia's or America's influence will end their confrontation. So we see why the US will always be Russia's enemy. These conflicts and confrontations aren't just recent events, but a legacy of a centuries-long history with deep ideological and strategic differences between the two leading global powers.